Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast, IDP edition. I'm your host, Jon Macri, and it's now that time of year to look ahead to the 2024 fantasy season. We've been entrenched in rookie and dynasty rankings over the past few months, I guess now, but now the focus solely becomes on the 2024 season as we turn our attention to helping you, the good listeners, bring home that trophy for the season. And we're going to start it off by looking at some bounce back candidates primed to return to IDP glory in 2024. So let's get it. All right. One of my favorite exercises and topics to discuss every offseason revolves around trying to figure out which players that had down years the previous season are going to return to form in the season ahead. We're talking bounce back candidates. And luckily for you all, I am joined by someone who has never needed a return to form because he stays in his peak at all times. From footballguys.com, the great Dynasty Tripp. Tripp, what is up, my friend?
Well, you're very kind to say that. What's up is my weight's up about 30 pounds, so I'm in peak form, and it's not probably coming down anytime soon. So, but I appreciate you having me on the podcast, and always excited to talk football with you, Jonathan.
Yeah, man. Like I said, one of my favorite episodes to do every off season, and it's because I get to talk to you and get your insight on these players to kind of sort out who we saw last year that was inefficient or whatever, and trying to figure out if they can actually get back to being IDP relevant. So I always appreciate your thoughts and having you on here to try to figure out. And weight might be up, whatever, it's up for all of us. But mentally, we're still in our peak. I like
that's right. That's right.
So yeah,
I got another 10 or 20 years of that before it starts really fading.
Perfect. That's good. That's a good number right there. But yeah, there's plenty of players like, every single season who let us down and disappoint with poor performances, whether it was due to injury, bad scheme fit, bad luck, or just overall inefficiency, right? So what we like to do, as we keep saying, is find the players who could be primed for a bounce back after last year, because there is usually some nice value to uncover from finding these types of players as other IDP managers might be like down on them, right? So Tripp, we've done this for like 3 years now, I think, and I always enjoy trying to figure out who these bounce backs are, while sussing out the ones who might just probably suck, right? And I think we've got a good list of players here who don't suck, even though last year's IDP point totals might lead people to believe they do. So Tripp, let's kick things off with your first pick at defensive tackles. One of my faves at the position, and not just because his name is Jonathan. Washington Commanders defensive tackle Jonathan Allen.
Yeah, I think John Allen, is prime for a bounce back year. I think he's a really good player. And I think that the entire Washington Commanders defense just was so unbelievably bad last year that it just put a stink on every incumbent starter, including Allen. I think that he's a top 5 defensive tackle in the NFL. I think that he should be drafted as that for fantasy football. He only had 5.5 sacks last year, which isn't bad for a D tackle, but by his standards, it's low. He is a little down on on tackles as well. Most notably, he didn't create any turnovers, which was first time in quite a few years that's happened. So I think with the new attacking front that Dan Quinn's going to bring in, I like his opportunities to return to form in the sack column. And he's just too good of a player to just to set aside. I think if he's going to say the 10th D tackle, I just think that's a tremendous bargain. So this isn't a huge reach as a bounce back. This is a guy that could bounce back simply incrementally by making a few big plays, by having a few more sacks. And I really expect that with the defense that's coming in. It's focused on getting to the passer, and probably at the expense of some of the run defense, quite honestly. So I don't know that we'll see a rebound in tackles, but I think with big plays and in a big play scoring league, I just think that he's just a tremendous player. And so he would be my first choice at the position for a bounce back candidacy.
Yeah, it's a great pick, right? Because I always feel like John Allen, like he's always one of the more kind of underappreciated and underrated players at his position. Like he's never all that flashy, but like solid production every single year. Last year obviously it was a bit down year compared to his norm. Like it was the first time I think since his rookie season. You said tackles were down. Like his rookie season, he only played 5 games, and that was the only other year that he didn't have at least 60 tackles in a season. Sack total down to 5.5, 7.5 the year before that, 9 the year even before that. So he's, again, like we expect better production from him. The run defense grade was weird for him last season. It was also way off from his norm, 37.9. Like he's never really elite in that regard. Like he's definitely more of a kind of a specialized pass rusher than run stuffer, but 37.9 was one of the worst in the league. So I have to imagine he bounces back there as well. Even like you said, if Dan Quinn's defense doesn't necessarily have that focus, like I just don't think he's that bad as what that 1 year will say. So he had some missed tackles in there as well, which I think contributed to that. Like 12.1% missed tackle rate was his worst mark since his rookie season too. So other than that, like pass rush metrics continue to be really encouraging for him, like top 12 at the position in expected sacks, 15% win rate. That was actually up from 2022 as well. So like even though his pressure rate was kind of down from 2022, like it's less of a concern when you still consider that he's a plus at the line of scrimmage and winning at a high rate like that. So those pressures and those sacks, they're going to come as long as he maintains that level of play, which I think he absolutely is capable of. So I like that pick quite a bit. All right, another D tackle to talk about here, and another one of my faves at the position, and not just because I wish my name was Javon. It's San Francisco 49ers interior defensive lineman Javon Hargrave. So he's another one of these kind of steady vets at the position, right? He comes into this season at what, 31 years old or so. So on the older side, but still very much like one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL. Last year was his first season with the 49ers, and it wasn't as strong as I think IDP managers, myself included, had kind of hoped for after he was coming off that career year in terms of sacks the season prior to that. But, as we know, sacks play a significant part in how well a defensive lineman scores in IDP. And Hargrave's 7 sacks in 2023 was like, it was a good number. It wasn't quite enough to keep him in that locked in, like weekly starter spot for IDP. He went from 12 fantasy points per game in 2023, which was DT 14, and finished as the DT 10 overall, to just 9.1 in 2023, which was DT 28 and the DT 29 overall. So it all mostly came from those sacks. And again, we talked about it with Jonathan Allen. We could talk about it with Hargrave as well. And it's something that I talk about a lot, but sacks, sack rate, unreliable metrics to lean on year to year, right? Like using a player's expected sacks is a more stable and predictive metric. And for Hargrave, like his pass rush grade, expected sack totals in 2023 were top 10 marks at his position. But, obviously his points per game total suffered a fair bit from that drop off in actual sack production. His tackle numbers did decline a little bit as well. He was always in that 60 tackle range in the last 2 years with the Eagles, but just 44 this past year. So main thing for me, just coming through, delivering some more of those big plays, like a Jonathan Allen, like you said. So, his pass rush metrics indicate that he's capable of that, and with that, we'll be able to, maybe see a bounce back season from him. So, what do you think, Tripp? Am I being too optimistic for a defensive lineman now in his 30s, or how do you feel about Hargrave?
I'm right there with you. I think it's a pretty similar situation to John Allen in that he just didn't quite have the same success. He didn't have the turnovers that the same way that just like John Allen didn't have those turnovers, and that hurt his overall score. The 7 sacks is good, but maybe not quite what you'd hoped. San Francisco defense, we know, is a monster unit. One of the hesitations you have with if you're in a tackle heavy league, is that this is a defense where Hargrave, it's not like he was in Philadelphia where they're more multiple in their fronts. This is a defense where he's really tasked with getting upfield. And so he's running by ball carriers occasionally. Yeah. So if you're in a tackle heavy scheme, then maybe the tackle numbers for both of these guys are who they are, where they're kind of a middling number and they're in the 50s there. But the total combined tackles, but these guys finished what my football guys scoring. John Allen finished 22, Hargrave finished 27, and that suggests that in a league where you only start one tackle, that these are on the fringes of consideration. Whereas I don't think that's a way to assess them at all. I think both guys are strong options, and if they're sitting there on the board, then just take other positions and let them continue to sit and grab one of them as you get later and you're filling out your lineup. If you're going to start two, then these guys should be priorities. I'm a strong believer that if you're in a true position format where you're starting two tackles, that I think D tackles is a important priority in your draft strategy. I think you just can't count on these guys coming out of nowhere like Justin Matabuki did last year. You've got to get these prime players to the position.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I talked about that. I think it was last week. I did the defensive tackle dynasty rankings and talked about how important that position is for IDP, like especially in those DT required leagues. Like there is a pretty big drop off for the position. Like once it gets outside of that top 24 in scores, like more so than any other position at IDP, because it is like it's a deeper position now. There's more guys kind of emerging, but it's still a pretty scarce position and can still be pretty volatile. So yeah, you target those, these high end guys like a Hargrave, like a Jonathan Allen, I think is definitely the way to go. It's not a position to be ignored, basically.
100%.
All right, let's move on to some edge rushers now. And Tripp, why don't you start us off with your first pick here? Now of the Miami Dolphins, it is Shaquille Barrett.
Well, this was one of your picks from last year. So, but maybe you hit the cutting room floor for this year. I think he's a good player. I think we agree that this guy's a really good player. It feels like he's been around for a long time. He is entering his age 32 season, and folks might say, well, he got cut by Tampa Bay, didn't he? Yeah, he did, but it's more of a cap casualty, emergence of young players with Yaya Diaby, the third round pick coming out of nowhere. He lands in Miami in a good spot. This is folks are going to say, well, they have Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb. Well, Chubb injured his ACL, I think, like pretty much the last play of the regular season or something like that. And Phillips popped an Achilles mid-year. So those guys, I mean, there is a realm of possibilities where neither of those guys gets back on the field during the fantasy season this year. I mean, they may, but point is that Barrett steps into a edge one role for a decent unit. I don't know they're great. I mean, they were a little disappointing last year, and I've lost some pieces, but I think there is still a decent unit with a good offense. They're going to be playing downhill. So he only had 4.5 sacks last year, but that's because defenses were able to focus on him. He played effectively. He'll come in and he'll play effectively for the Dolphins. I do expect that he'll lead the unit, lead the edge group in Miami in all statistical categories, sheerly by the volume that he play. Folks might expect Chop Robinson, the rookie, to come in. You just can't count on a rookie, especially one drafted in the 20s, to step in there and play 800 snaps. I think the signing of Calais Campbell hints at that as well. So I think this guy is just a straight up sleeper in a sense that folks may have think that he didn't bounce back last year from his Achilles injury in 21, or was it 22 with the Achilles injury. He came back healthy in 23, did play effectively, didn't have the numbers to show for it. I do expect that he'll have the numbers to show for it this year. And so I would expect a big jump in sacks. And this is a guy you can get as your edge 4 in a lot of leagues. And I think is a prime candidate for bounce back.
Yeah, I mean, what was crazy to me about Barrett last season, like coming off that Achilles injury, is not only did he play 16 games and nearly 750 snaps, like including the playoffs, but he went on to post his best pass rush grade of his entire career last year with an 82.6. Also the second best win rate of his career at 15%, and fourth best pressure rate of his career. Like the guy was amazing last year coming off a torn Achilles, and who else is on that team will be coming off a torn Achilles as well, like that can maybe learn from Shaq Barrett as far as recovery and treatment and in-season management of that often, debilitating injury. Jalen Phillips, could potentially be a sponge with Barrett now in the building as well, because we all want Jalen Phillips to come back in the same way. And man, if he's on the Shaq Barrett recovery plan, then I have full confidence that he will, especially for a young player still in his prime. But not to turn this into a Jalen Phillips shout out. So back to Barrett, like he was edge 30 in points per game last year, edge 31 overall. Like even if you look at where he was in 2022 before the Achilles injury, he was at 11.7 points per game for us, which was edge 23. Now I know, like you said, it's a new team. We don't know what the rotation is exactly going to look like there, especially considering Phillips and Chubb are probably going to miss significant time coming off those injuries. But I would not be surprised if Shaq Barrett leads them, like you said, in all those statistical categories. Especially Chop Robinson feels more like a designated pass rusher to start his career at the very least, right? So he's a great shot at bouncing back and being their leading production man at the edge position. So big fan of Shaq Barrett and really hoping that he does deliver this season. All right, let's go to our next edge defender. And we definitely have a bit of a theme going with these defensive linemen so far. And I think, it's been pretty common every year for us because we tend to have a soft spot for these old guys. And Zadarius Smith is another one of those guys. He'll be 32 years old come week 1, but this dude is a freak. Zadarius Smith posted some of the best marks at his position last year. And then he re-signed with the Cleveland Browns this offseason to once again partner up there with reigning Defensive Player of the Year, Myles Garrett. But for me, like Zadarius Smith's bounce back candidacy is based entirely on that lower sack total in 2023, 5.5 last season, because I don't think it was indicative of his actual play, especially after, a really impressive 10 sack season in 2022, coming off that, I guess it was a back surgery or neck surgery, both. I can't remember. I think back, right? But in 2021 that was. But from a pass rush perspective, like he's already bounced back from that. Like now we just need kind of the sacks to follow suit, right? Like last year, Zadarius Smith recorded his best pass rush grade of his career since 2019. He maintained a top 10 pass rush grade at his position and top 10 win rate at his position, just like he did in 2022 when he posted 10 sacks on the season. So even if, he isn't, I don't expect him to necessarily get back into double-digit sack territory at this stage of his career, though I kind of hope he does. Like him and Garrett there as well, probably getting there might give the Browns their first 2 double-digit sack getters in a season, maybe ever. I don't know. Someone could fact check me on that. But even if, he doesn't get to that double-digit sack total, like he still measures as one of the best pass rushers at his position. And I think deserving of a greater sack total than 5.5 in 2024, if he plays as well as he did in 2023. And, there's no doubt, I think those sack totals will be on the rise in 2024. If that's the case, like went from 12.3 points per game in 2022, which was edge 19, to 7.3 points per game in 2023 at edge 66. So obviously a big drop off because those sack totals weren't there. But if he can get back to that, I think we're looking at a clear bounce back for Zadarius Smith.
Yeah, I agree that I think what's really striking about Smith is that he had like 27 total tackles on. Sorry, I had a cat literally walk across my keyboard out there. So.
Cameo.
I think that's what's really striking about it. But still, I 100% agree. The guy played really well. He played effectively in 2022. He was out with 2021 with that neck issue. And why Minnesota didn't keep him around, I'm not 100% sure, but they had some turnover in the coaching staff and decided to let Smith walk. And he shows up in Cleveland, and the snap numbers were down a little bit because I guess they have Obo Okoronkwo to go along with him, but then they had but still he's every bit as effective. I think the only risk is I'm looking at Football Guys scoring, and he's not the 63rd edge overall, and it's largely because of those. Well, in part because of those 27 tackles in addition to those 5.5 sacks. And so if you are in a a tackle heavy format, that's just insanely low. I mean, considering the number of snaps he has, that's got to bounce back at least a little bit. I don't think it comes way back. This is another one of those defenses where they're really focused on getting upfield, and it really is focused on the quarterback. And so, but that being said, it's all the more reason to expect that sack total to go up. He's playing effectively. He's got Myles Garrett opposite him. So you got to like their opportunities there. So yeah, I agree. I was looking at Shaq Barrett there, and he was still was 27th football guy scoring. So it was a little higher than I had recalled, which is interesting that he would still in the ADP that the IDP show is collecting. He's outside the top 49 edges. And so folks are, I think Zadarius Smith is too. So folks are really down on these older guys, and they just are just too quick to jump ahead to the young players en masse. Yeah. If you look at the young players in the IDP shows ADP, they've got Latu and Dallas Turner and Jared Verse up there at the top 30 or 35 edges. And these older guys just get overlooked. And I just think that's just in principle a mistake.
Yeah, there's a ton of value to be had in these older guys, especially guys that like on this list here in this bounce back category who were down last year, because there's a lot of people that just look at like last year's points per game or point totals, right? And if they're down, then they move on from them. So they try to find somewhere else. But those aren't the things that are stable year to year, right? So we try to find a little bit more than that. And I'm with you. I think Zadarius Smith, with those sack totals coming up, that helps his overall potential, obviously, in a big way. So all right, another couple of edge rushers here still to discuss. But next up on the list, Tripp, I can't help but feel like you've handpicked some of my favorite players to lift here because next man up on the list is Green Bay Packers star edge Rashawn Gary.
Well, I guess I have an eye for all that green that PFF uses for their high grades. So that's why we have the graphic on screen as we talk. Rashawn Gary finished as the 32nd edge in football guys with a little more tackle heavy scoring than some of the other scoring systems out there. The prime reason is the guy played fewer than 600 snaps. And coaches were honest about this through the course of the season. He had pulled an ACL in 2022, and they wanted him on a sort of a ceiling or a limit of snaps throughout a big chunk of the season. And so he eventually did pick it up and finished with 9 sacks on the season, but playing fewer than 600 snaps is one of the lowest totals of true starters at the position across the NFL. And you consider that he played every game. So that's a remarkably low number that's starting to go up. And so this is a player that played effectively. The 9 sacks with fewer than 600 snaps is adequate efficiency from a per snap basis. Points per snap are fine. It's that he just didn't play enough to put up the kind of numbers that people may have expected when they drafted him as a low edge 1 or quality edge 2 last year in drafts. So I'm sure folks are disappointed. I don't know if we could have predicted that he would just have his playing time suppressed like that the entire year. And we knew it was possible. We knew that he could have tweaked something. He didn't. Fortunately, he stayed healthy all year. He just didn't see the volume that he has in years past. And when you have Preston Smith, who's getting older, and Lucas Van Ness, who has yet to emerge, Kingsley Enagbare, who is maybe something, it's just I've got to imagine that Gary is going to see an uptick in playing time and therefore an uptick in numbers for 2024.
Yeah, I mean, I love this call. Like Gary, like you said, he had that ACL in 2022. Before that, like he was a top 12 edge that season in points per game. He was averaging 13.6 points per game for us that year. But unfortunately, like it was just 9 games, right? So like you said, coming off the ACL last year, they were clearly ramping him up, right, to start the year at the very least. Like he didn't crack 50% of the snaps through any of the first 5 weeks heading into that bye week. And then, after week 6, he didn't go under 50%, but he was in that comfortable kind of 60% range every week, which wasn't overly high, but it was a pretty clear strategy like he laid out for them. So, he looked good last year. Like he's another kind of athletic freak, that's coming off an injury that can still play at a high level. Like he wasn't quite to that 2022 pre-injury production, right? And a lot of that had to do with the limited playing time, like you said. But I mean, I'm definitely into Rashawn Gary this year. Only 26 years old. You know, we know that, again, he's that freak athlete who has now hit his stride in the NFL. He had a 90.1 pass rush grade in 2021, the year before that ACL. Still a really strong 74.2 pass rush grade in 2023 coming off the ACL. 66 pressures, 9 sacks. Like, I think he's got a much higher ceiling than that. So, you know, there's definitely worlds where I think Rashawn Gary could be an easy edge one candidate in IDP, and that very well could come as soon as this year if he is fully healthy. So yeah, like that call quite a bit. Okay, let's go with a player who I think might be one of the more underrated players for IDP right now. It's Josh Sweat of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Josh Sweat, people loved him in 2022 when his overall efficiency led to 11 sacks on just 356 pass rush snaps. But that was always going to be difficult to kind of replicate. And then that's why he did drop down to 6.5 this past year. But he's getting some great playing time, I think, to help him push closer to that double-digit sack total. So Sweat set a new career high in playing time in 2023 with 828 defensive snaps, which was 564 pass rush snaps. And with now Hassan Reddick off to the New York Jets as well, like, they're going to rely on him, I think, heavily in this defense, which creates a lot of opportunities here to bounce back. So he was a top 12 edge rusher in expected sacks this past season, but again, delivering just 6.5, ranked 45th at the position. So there's like a pretty significant gap there for Sweat to fill. And it starts with, high-end playing time creating those opportunities. And then his pass rush metrics are also strong. Like, they're not as good as they were during that career year in 2022, but he's still ranked 14th in total pressures, which by itself should have led to more sacks. And then the Eagles did bring in Bryce Huff this offseason, but Bryce Huff's never been an every down contributor. I don't think he's ever played more than 40 defensive snaps in a single game. So I don't think he's likely to really hurt Sweat's playing time. Like, even with Nolan Smith, the 2023 first rounder there, like, he's going to rotate in more this year. I don't think he's necessarily like a huge concern for Josh Sweat either, considering that they don't have Hassan Reddick anymore. So I got a good feeling. I haven't seen the ADP. If you look at it right now, like, I would say he's probably going well outside the top 20 edges into that probably edge 30 range in drafts, because again, people love to look at last year's points, right? and use that as the measuring stick for this season. But, not people that listen to this podcast, right? They're smarter than that. But it also means, there are plenty of people who aren't as locked in as to Sweat, where he could be getting undervalued, and I do really believe that he could have a nice bounce back and outperform his ADP this year. He was edge 40 for us last year in points per game at 10.4. The year before that, he was edge 21 at 12.3 points per game. So there's a nice spot for him to kind of get back into that range if those expected sack totals do translate like we expect them to.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on Sweat. He was edge 43 by Football Guys scoring, and he's currently, his ADP on the IDP shows ADP is edge 31. I think what's most striking about Sweat is really the entire Eagles defense, where they had 70 sacks in 2022 with totally insane efficiency that everybody knew wasn't repeatable. But somehow the pendulum swung so hard the other way, where, like you were saying about the expected sacks, they were still getting pressure. They just their sacks were just totally the opposite, where they were not, where they were below average efficiency in terms of converting those pressures to sacks, which was really striking. And then you look back at the track record of the situation in the coaching box, where they started off with Sean Desai, who has had his second opportunity to coordinate a defense and seems to know the recipe of the Vic Fangio defense, but can't seem to assemble it and cook it. And then so they replaced him halfway through the season with Matt Patricia. Yes, the same Matt Patricia that called offensive plays in New England a couple of years ago and and coached the Lions defense a couple years before that and led the league in 3-man rushes. And so I was like, well, maybe there's some pretty clear reasons why he didn't get more than the 6.5 sacks after all. Well, those reasons are gone. They're bringing in Vic Fangio, and I'm not as excited about Fangio as I used to be. I'm not sure what the heck he did in Miami last year. That was a bit of a head scratcher, but Fangio has been involved with the Eagles defense before. He was a consultant with the team in 2022. Mm-hmm. He knows the personnel. I think he can come in here and get this unit playing well and get their numbers back, where this is clearly an above average defense and they're making plays. And so I like this call too. I think he's a Sweat to be a candidate to lead the team in sacks. I think Huff helps him more than hurts him. I think Reddick clearly declined last year. I think that's why the Eagles saw him as expendable. They bring in Bryce Huff, who by some metrics was the best pass rusher in the NFL by some efficiency metrics, which is bananas with pass rush win rate. We'll see how many snaps he can pick up, or if Nolan Smith is a guy in base sets or what. But yeah, Sweat should easily lead the edge group in snaps, in my opinion. So I like this pick a lot too.
Nice. Yeah. I'm excited about Josh Sweat this year. And like you said, if he's going as edge 31, that's a nice value for me to kind of take advantage of there. All right, let's jump into some linebackers now, Tripp. And we'll start with a player who I feel like he was one of my picks last year as well when we did this. So I hope you have better luck with him. It is Devondre Campbell now of the San Francisco 49ers.
Well, I had conveniently forgotten that you would pick Campbell last year.
I remember if I did. I feel like I did, but
okay, I don't remember that's one. But we'll pretend you didn't. So
yeah, sure. Fair enough.
Well, Devondre Campbell picks up the best temp job at the end in the country right now. He steps in for Dre Greenlaw, who tore an Achilles in the Super Bowl. I mean, and it's unlikely that he gets on the field for the regular season. So Campbell steps into that role, and it is fair to note that he was their second choice there. They picked up Eric Kendricks, and Eric Kendricks had a better offer to go to Dallas. So now Campbell's in there, but Campbell has been an effective player in the past. He's an interesting player to me. He had some time in Atlanta where I thought he was just horrendous. And it was amazing the emergence that he had in Green Bay. And then he seemed to backslide last year, and he took to public media or social media to point to injuries, which is interesting, a bit of a red flag, I suppose. But nevertheless, he steps into a role playing alongside Fred Warner for a team that played the fewest dime snaps in the NFL last year. They didn't bring in any help at safety, let Tashawn Gibson leave, and he's on the street right now. So they're planning to roll with Talanoa Hufanga and Jair Brown as safety. Don't have much else. So you're not expecting a big dime formations out of them. So as a result, I think that Campbell just almost by default is able to fall into 100 tackles, and a pretty easy pick in terms of a guy that's going to play 90% of the snaps and on a good defense. And it's just the fact that he's on a good defense raises all boats in terms of opportunities for turnovers and big plays. So he's playing in the middle of a defense that's more too high than anything. So I think tackle efficiency should be there. I think he's a pretty easy bounce back pick. So I like him a lot for the regular season. If you have fantasy teams going to playoffs, yeah, he's going to possibly give away to Dre Greenlaw, but that's not what most of us do. So
yeah. And that's the thing, right? Like, who knows when Dre Greenlaw is going to come back, but I mean, I love it for this, at least the start of this season for Devondre Campbell, right? Like you said, I don't know what was going on last year. He sent out like some cryptic tweets or something like that, like that he wasn't happy with this like treatment or status in Green Bay. So I honestly have no idea what that was about, but he's out of there now. And like you said, he's a great bet for at least 100 tackles here. He hasn't cracked that in 2 straight seasons after that amazing year in 2021 with Green Bay that also got him paid as well. So yeah, the big thing just going to be filling in for Dre Greenlaw. I doubt he's back anytime soon. And if he does come back, like, yeah, maybe he eats into Campbell's snaps like a bit, but like, I feel like there will be a ramp up period for Dre Greenlaw as well, where he might not be a full-time player. And you mentioned like San Francisco's defense, like they don't play dime very much. And they do at least have they're around average in base personnel as well. So if Dre Greenlaw were to come back like late regular season, something like that, like it's very possible they could just use him as the third linebacker there in base while he, gets back to full health. So yeah, it's a great defense for Devondre Campbell to be productive in. in as a full-time player. Yeah, when I did the linebacker tackle projections article, like just based on the defensive schemes a few weeks ago, their LB2 spot was a top 10 spot in the league, and yeah, Campbell it can absolutely be productive in there. So yeah, I like the call quite a bit. Okay, I have another linebacker name on here. It's Josey Jewell of the Carolina Panthers, and I'll be curious with your take on this one, Tripp, because I don't necessarily think he'll be an every down player, but I do think he'll just be better overall this year and a better fit in this defense, because I thought he was going to be back to I thought he was going to be 100% guy last year in Denver, but that's my fault for doubting Alex Kingleton even a little bit, because Jewell, he ended up under delivering big time on my expectations of him in 2023, both in playing time and tackle production. In 2022, he ranked in the 90th percentile in tackles versus expected, while playing 95% of the team's defensive snaps across 13 games. So this past year, just 73% of snaps, ranked in the 26th percentile at his position in tackles versus expected across 16 games, and only 30 fewer snaps than the year prior. So one of the big changes for Jewell from 2022 to 2023 was the departure of defensive coordinator Ejiro Evero, who deployed Jewell as his lead linebacker, and now who he's going to reunite with here in Carolina. So Shaq Thompson is there, and he's going to be expected back healthy after missing most of last year. So I think there's a chance that Thompson outsnaps Jewell, but not a guarantee. So we'll see how it shakes out. But even if Josey Jewell doesn't get like a true every down role in 2024 with the Panthers, because they didn't have that last year from their secondary linebacker, like I think it's more his comfort and familiarity with Evero's defense that hopefully will allow for more consistent production and stronger play at the position overall, which could lead to more playing time, similar to kind of what IDP managers got from him in 2022 when he was producing 16.1 points per game. He was LB2 for us in that regard, plus 11.2 tackles versus expected. That was LB13, 71.7 PFF grade. That was LB25. And obviously the 95% snap share compared to what it was last year, where he was like LB51 in points per game. I mentioned the tackles versus expected in the 26th percentile, and his PFF grade was down to LB45 as well with a 67.2. So what do you think, Tripp? Like, do you think there's a chance that, he could potentially be a full-time guy, or at least above that 73% snap share from 2023? Because obviously that makes all the difference in the world, right? For his potential to bounce back. So where are you at with Jewell? Am I maybe too optimistic here?
Well, I'm actually interested to hear you think that there's a chance that Shaq Thompson might wear the dot and play full-time with Jewell playing alongside him?
Well, that's just more the familiarity with being in Carolina for that long. Like, he's been a starter, like a full-time starter for longer than Josey Jewell as well. Like, Jewell was really only the 1 year as a full-time starter in the NFL. Like, he's been spot starter here and there, right? And been mostly kind of the secondary guy, where Shaq Thompson's been a lead before and has been an every down linebacker. So that's the only thing that really gives me the edge for him, is just overall experience. But I mean, I think, with Evero and knowing that Shaq Thompson wasn't there last year for him, maybe it is Jewell that can be the LB1 there. That's kind of the question I have to figure out here.
Yeah, I may have jumped to a conclusion by thinking, well, it looks straightforward to me. I felt like it was a slam dunk with Jewell for a bounce back candidate. So I saw that in your article. I'm like, well, he took one of mine. So I'm sure those, so you get to use him. I think that Jewell, like you said, he wore the dot and was the defensive signal caller for the Broncos defense under Ejiro Evero in 2022. And Jewell was expected to wear the dot in 2023, and he got banged up and missed some time, and they switched it. And Singleton ended up wearing the dot. And so when Jewell got back from injury, they just didn't switch it back. And, sometimes I wonder, is just Vance Joseph with some really strange personnel decisions, or is this about just establishing consistency with being a new coordinator with a new unit? On the Carolina side, Thompson did, in fact, wear the dot for Evero. However, he played all of about 69 snaps before he got hurt. And so in the first game, which is the only game which they had both of their two starting linebackers healthy, I believe, Shaq Thompson and Frankie Louvu both played 100% of snaps. And so with, of course, Thompson wearing the dot. So I think there's a good chance that both of these guys come in and play at 90% of snaps for Carolina and are both useful fantasy linebackers. I was just again, maybe assuming that since Evero had Jewell at Denver in 2022, and it was world's best kept secret that they weren't going to bring Jewell back after 2023. His contract had expired, or at least a balloon, one of those, and they knew that he was going to walk. And so he goes and immediately makes contact with Evero, his former defensive coordinator, who got him into a full-time role. And to me, it looks like easy pickings to me. I like the call. I think that Jewell is able to step in and become an LB2 at probably a much lower price. I'm curious to see what the ADP is here. I'll look it up right quick. But I like the call a lot.
Okay, nice. Yeah, so that makes me feel more optimistic about him for sure. Because you're right. Like that's the question that I have. And yeah, thinking about, like you said, if Frankie Louvu and Shaq Thompson were both full-time guys last year, they didn't really have another option once Shaq Thompson went down either. Like it was Camu Grugier-Hill and like Chandler Wooten were the other guys that they were rolling out there. So it's no surprise that they weren't using them as full-time players. So if that's the case, I would be very excited about Jewell, even more so than I currently am, because I'm tempering expectations at the moment. But I do like that. I do like that call. I think there's definitely potential here for that full-time role. So excited about Josey Jewell. All right, next up, a nice pick here, and a name that might not be on the forefront of everyone's mind heading into 2024, but hey, that's what we're here for. Tripp, one of your linebacker bounce back picks, Mack Wilson of the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah, well, this is one of my super deep specials. Folks that have followed this particular edition of your podcast for the last 3 or 4 years have probably heard, like, who is he talking about now? Well, this is my who is he talking about selection for 2024. So Mack Wilson hasn't been fantasy relevant since 2019, when he was a rookie 5th round pick of the Cleveland Browns and starting in the middle of a bad defense. And he became a rotational piece for the remainder of his rookie contract. Landed in New England on something that was a shade over the veteran minimum last year as depth. Emerged due to some injuries. And got himself a good sized contract. And a lot of folks don't seem to have noticed that he has arrived in Arizona when the Cardinals are paying him like $4.6 million a year for the next 3 years, which is healthy money. It's not full-time money. It's not the money that Queen got to play in Pittsburgh, but it's enough money to say that he is absolutely going to play. The simple answer is he's going to line up next to Kaiser White as an LB2 and play 80% of snaps in a defense that does play a little bit more too high, that does have, and I believe will have, more snaps available for their LB2 than they put on Josh Woods last year. If you're thinking who? Yeah, Josh Woods, a guy that was a street free agent for the Lions and somehow emerged as the LB2 in a rebuilding defense in the coach's first year last year. So I'm not too worried about that being a precedent for him. The wrinkle of this whole thing that's really fascinating for me is that Mack Wilson emerged in part due to edge injuries in New England. Guys like Judon came out. And so Mack Wilson sort of played this inside-outside role that like Kyle Van Noy might have years ago. And he, for some reason, New England seems to be the only team in the league that can make that work. Then so he gets signed by the Arizona Cardinals. And the Arizona Cardinals' top 3 edge rushers, 2 of them happen to be former inside linebackers. Yeah. So there's a not less than 0 chance that Mack Wilson is going to play edge in Arizona, which makes me a little nervous. So I listened to every podcast I could find that was broadcast from OTAs in Arizona that they have, fortunately, nicely have them on their site. And I could not get them to say, they didn't say which position group Wilson was practicing with in any of those podcasts. So that's the interesting risk of this whole thing. So I guess you might determine whether or not he's a utility, what based on your scoring. If you're in a big play scoring league and this guy's an edge rusher, and he's linebacker eligible in true position, that's kind of interesting. So if he ends up as an edge, if he's simply a the inside linebacker next to White, then he's more of a LB4 type injury bye week replacement. But he should be free in most redraft leagues. I've really been surprised in some of my dynasty leagues that people won't trade him to me for peanuts. So
wow.
Some people are watching, which I'm impressed with my league mates for keeping an eye on it.
Yeah, shout out to them because a lot of people might not be aware of Mac Wilson after beyond his rookie season, right? Like you're right. It was an interesting year last year for him, like because the Patriots, they got the most out of him really for how they used him, right? Like he played 43% of his snaps on the defensive line and he rushed on 82% of those. So they found a very specific role for him and he graded well too, like 81.5 overall grade, 86.9 coverage grade, 71.7 run defense grade. They were all excellent, but yeah, limited usage. I remember like his rookie year, like he was terrible, like grading in the 40s, terrible. So Bill Belichick always finds a way, like, and he loves his Alabama guys too, and he made it work for him. So whether he plays on the edge or inside in Arizona, I'm tending to lean that he's going to play inside because they also have a lack of depth there. Like Chris Barnes is really the only other guy. Other than Kaiser White, obviously. But yeah, if he's that inside linebacker, it's probably not a full-time role because just based on last year, right? They didn't really deploy anybody in a second full-time role, but they also didn't have the personnel last year either. And maybe, he could spend some of those non-inside linebacker snaps on the edge because he does have experience there. And they also are relatively thin at that position too. So I like the prospect of Mac Wilson right now. And like you said, for the most part, he's been pretty free in a lot of leagues. And I imagine once you start doing drafts, like he's going to be one of the cheaper linebackers that you can get. And there's a combination of probabilities for him, whether it's tackle production or pass rush production, depending on how they use him. But I think either way, like he's going to be productive and probably play more snaps than he has since his rookie season at the very least. Like I think he was around 900 that year. I don't think he's cracked 350 or 400 ever since then. So should easily be his most playing time since then. All right, one more linebacker here. We loaded up the position for you folks because we know linebackers are so beloved for IDP. And my last linebacker pick is going to be Denzel Perryman, now of the Los Angeles Chargers, and another one of those 30-plus-year-olds that we seem to like. So Perryman joins the Chargers under Jim Harbaugh and Jesse Minter this season, and this honestly could be the last time that I have any faith in Perriman if he doesn't come through because he hasn't been a full-time linebacker for a few years now. But man, you look at the Chargers depth chart right now, and if there's one thing that group lacks, it's starting NFL experience, and Perriman at the very least brings that to the table, right? So I don't know about you, Tripp, but like aside from Junior Colson, who is excluded, I'll exclude him because he played under Jim Harbaugh and Jesse Minter in Michigan last year as their lead linebacker. Like the team doesn't offer any obvious starting linebacker candidate. It's a whole lot of question marks right now between Diane Henley, Nick Neiman, Troy Dye, and something called Jeremiah Jean-Baptiste. So for whatever people think of Perriman or however the NFL views him, like I think his experience alone makes him a lock for the starting lineup right now. And I'd say probably more likely than Junior Colson as well. Like again, just because of that familiarity there and doing it at the NFL level. But yeah, last year it was disappointing. I thought he'd have a good shot to lead that defense in Houston as well. And to be fair, he started there, but then he got hurt, right? And then he got suspended and it just never panned out. So my whole thing is it's not necessarily him returning to like 2021 Denzel Perriman, where he had like 150 something tackles and led the league in tackles versus expected, but just like even 2022 Denzel Perriman would suffice from at least a rate and points per game standpoint. When he was 12.4 points per game, LB 25, compared to what he was last year, 9.4 points per game, LB 65. So I'm just banking on him getting closer to that 2022 form more so than anything, because there's just not a lot of options in LA right now.
Yeah, I've liked Denzel Perriman as a player for a long time. I've crapped on him so much on Twitter that I think his agent has noticed. I think I've had some interesting responses from a guy that kind of sounds like his agent when I look at the profile. But I do think he's a good player. I just have never thought much of him for fantasy. And so he was a pretty pleasant surprise for me in 2022 that you were mentioning. We had that 154 tackles. And, I was just banging the table. This guy's not a full-time guy, but then he pretty much did play full-time in 2022. He's a guy that kind of played long enough and learned enough and seemed to be able to kind of compensate for some of his athletic limitations and coverage liability. But he's a fun player. He's just a real downhill, aggressive player. He's exciting. He's enthusiastic. It's just, and so that really shined in Las Vegas for a couple of years that he was there. Another thing you mentioned about the efficiency is just insane. I mean, I always just assumed it was because he was a two-down player and not on the field for obvious passing situations, and therefore is just a run defender that was just had a nose for the ball in run defense. But that proved not to be the case when in Las Vegas, where the efficiency carried over despite the full-time role. And so I look at a situation in Los Angeles, and I may be more pessimistic than some on guys like Colson and Henley, but I look at the defensive tackle situation, the Chargers, and it's pitiful. So you're going to put a former wide receiver in Diane Henley who weighs about 225 behind those tackles and expect him to do anything? He's going to get washed out. And then you got Junior Colson, who's bigger, but he's a rookie. So he's got to deal with some of that same traffic. And the idea that he is ready as a rookie to come in and wear the dot in the NFL is based on what he did last year. Well, that's not the NFL. I think if he was ready to do that, he probably would be higher than a third-round pick. So I'm expecting Perriman to lead the group in snaps, in part just because he's the only guy that has the experience dealing with the kind of just the debris and the traffic that are going to come through the middle of this defense. This is a defense that wasn't particularly good last year, and from a personnel standpoint, they have some big names, but this has been the case for the Chargers for years. Big names, no depth. Even tangential starters, they don't have good role players, and I think that this is a defense that's going to struggle a little bit. They may have some opportunities for plays with Mack and Derwin James and some other guys, but I think from a run defense standpoint that they're just in a lot of trouble. And I think Perriman has been brought in part to do what they can to shore that up at the second level.
Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense. Like he's my favorite here to lead that Chargers linebacker group in snaps, and he's just got to stay healthy, right? And obviously, hopefully, not get suspended for whatever. I think it was like player safety concerns or something like that last year. I can't remember exactly, but if he's on the field, like I think that efficiency and that tackle production is going to carry over for him. So, like him quite a bit. Okay, safety time. And once again, you've picked out a personal favorite here for me, starting with Brandon Jones, the new free agent acquisition of the Denver Broncos. So tell us what you like about Jonesy here.
Well, I was afraid that this was one of my kind of personal type of reaching back because I'm old, got big picks, and taking a guy that I used to think was going to be a huge name in fantasy football because he was a box safety. Of course, the NFL has evolved, and we don't quite have box safeties the way we used to. That just fuels production like you might have had in 2018. But we have a guy here that looked the part a couple of years ago before he popped an ACL. I had 7 games, was on pace for 100 tackles. It was on pace to repeat the 5 sacks that he had in 2021. And then he, like I said, popped the ACL and lost time when he's playing for Brian Flores. Last year, he shows up, he's playing for Vic Fangio, and he's not able to secure a full-time role. So we're talking about a guy that's bouncing back and looking to revive form that he had for a couple of years ago for part of the season. So you think, well, what do you like about him? Well, what's really interesting to me is that he's going to play for Vance Joseph, and Vance Joseph is one of 2 or 3 defensive coordinators, along with Brian Flores, that will blitz from anywhere, that will bring safeties. This guy has been a productive blitzer. He's been a banger in the box. And you're listening to Greg Cosell talk on his podcast. Cosell thinks that he's evolved into a better player than given credit for, and a more complete safety. And when you look at the fact that Denver let Justin Simmons go, a former All-Pro, and bring in Brandon Jones, well, that's an interesting choice, right? Is like, Brandon Jones is an upgrade over Justin Simmons. Now, granted, the cash is a situation, but Justin Simmons is unsigned, which is just bizarre. But so they're able to come in more affordably with Brandon Jones. But my prediction is that they didn't bring in Brandon Jones to play 25 yards from the line of scrimmage in 600 snaps. My prediction is that they brought him in to play close to the line of scrimmage and hit people. And so it's, you know, it's a bit of a dark horse, I suppose, but Vance Joseph has delivered fantasy safeties in his defense before, and I'm going to bank on him to do it again. And when you look at Brandon Jones's ADP, I mean, this guy is nowhere in sight because he didn't play full time last year.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like he's one of those guys that's going to be, I think, a nice value here. And I love Brandon Jones. Like he's always been such an efficient IDP. Like whenever he does get on the field, like the only problem was that like teams never fully unleashed him in that full-time role, like you said, like specifically Miami and Brian Flores, and then, you know, or he'd get hurt, right? So, you know, at least Flores now, like he's kind of making up to us a little bit by giving Josh Metellus that full-time box role. So we'll forgive him there, but like getting Jones in that full-time role as all we've ever kind of wanted for him for IDP, because we've seen how productive he could be when he's on the field. Like in 2021, he ranked among the top 95th percentile in tackles versus expected, despite just 620 defensive snaps. In 2022, he ranked 98th percentile in tackles versus expected, despite just 334 snaps. And then last year, he still ranked 78th percentile in tackles versus expected, despite 464 snaps. Like on top of the ability to blitz and rush the passer, he's a tackling machine. And, you know, I know like doing my safety and scheme alignment projections and stuff, like it doesn't show that it's as friendly for him in Denver because they play a little bit more too high there. But like you said, there's still some opportunity to blitz and create those big plays. And I'm with you. Like I think Brandon Jones, his best usage comes around the line of scrimmage. So he's going to be a top 24 safety for me this season for sure. So I'm absolutely in on him as a top IDP here. Okay, another guy who I think has gone from, you know, one of the most sought after IDP safeties to someone that people turned on pretty quick after last year. It's Budda Baker of the Arizona Cardinals. So I talk a lot about like the inconsistency of the safety position and how there's like so much year to year variance where our top scorers each season, there's just a ton of turnover. But outside of last year, Budda Baker has been among the most consistent and efficient defensive backs for several years, maybe aside from Derwin James, probably the most consistent. But in 2023, he missed a handful of games with an injury, but also, you know, when he was in the lineup, he wasn't at that Budda Baker level of production that we've all kind of come to expect from him, posting just 11.8 fantasy points per game. And all it really was just a lack of big plays, which for, you know, the DB position and for all of IDP, I should say, it's, you know, it's consisting of those interceptions, fumbles, sacks, things like that. So he failed to record an interception for the first time since 2019, didn't force a fumble for only the second time in his career, didn't tally even a half sack for just the second time in his career, and also didn't break up a pass for the second time in his career. So all those things can be wildly unstable year to year. And that's where I come back to his tackle production to see, has he really fallen off, or is it something that we can expect him to bounce back from? And his tackle production still among the very best at the position. He delivered in the 90th percentile in tackles versus expected, despite missing all that time and playing the fewest amount of snaps that he has since his rookie season. And for me, that's just a great sign. I think that he still, you know, could be the Budda Baker of old and bounce back with just a little bit more luck, right? So you look at his big play rate. So again, including those interceptions, sack, fumbles, fumble recoveries, all those kinds of things, 0.68% last year, big play rate. That was 111th among safeties. The year before that, 1.71%. That was safety 31. And as a result, he had 14.7 points per game in 2022. That was good for safety 5. Last year, 11.8 points per game, safety 33. So, yeah, I think, you know, again, a full season of Budda Baker, again, a little bit more luck in a very unstable metric in big plays. Like he can absolutely come back to that safety 1 range, like top 12 safety.
Buda Baker's an interesting one. I was really fascinated to see that you posted something on the Bird app the other day that had what the percentage of players at each position that repeat as top 24 assets, I think it was. And I was quite shocked to see that safety was even lower than cornerback in terms of repeat performance. I never would have guessed
last
that.
year.
So, yeah, last year, right? Yeah.
Last year, yeah.
So that was something to see. But it goes to what you said with the big plays, and then you add to the fact that the position has become so flat with the rise in two-play utility and the interchangeable safeties. You don't have one guy playing 700 snaps deep and the other guy playing the huge number of snaps in the box anymore, like you had 5, 6, 7 years ago. It makes it harder to predict. And so I've been thinking over the last several months that a part of the solution is to simply at the position take good players, and this would be a situation where we know that Buda Baker's a good player, that the defense was really bad last year. In the first year, the cornerback situation was horrendous. They were picking up guys and starting them off the street like Starling Thomas, and it's like, all right, who? And so they've invested some picks in the corner position and in the defensive tackle position. I think they're going to want to be a little bit more aggressive, play a little bit more press man, try to get some interior pressure to stop the quick passing game. And I think there'll be a little more opportunities for him to make plays this year. And so all we really want from fantasy football is the opportunity to build a lineup based on good players and have that succeed. And so from that standpoint, I like Buda Baker as an option to bounce back.
Nice. All right, next name on the list, and I'm glad you have him here because I'll be curious your take on this whole Bengals safety room as a whole. Trip, you got Von Bell as your last pick here for a bounce back season.
Yeah, this one almost feels like I'm missing something. So Von Bell was the safety of the Bengals for 5 years, and I think he was basically a DB2 every year he was there. Never quite the breakout that we really hoped when he first arrived from New Orleans, but productive enough, sometimes through tackles, sometimes through big plays. He goes to Carolina last year, plays for edge row, every row. He's sitting back in two high shells all the time, doesn't do anything. He gets cut out of salary cap reasons. He's back in Cincinnati, and he steps right back into the same role that he had. Well, the fascinating thing was the player that replaced him last year, Dax Hill, was also a DB2. And Dax Hill, it's been reported, is going to play nickel and not, which is where he played his last year in college, and not safety. And so Von Bell has his job back. Maybe it's too easy, but he just slides back into the DB2 role that he vacated a year before and gives us DB2 numbers. And this is a guy that's just, again, totally off radars, just way late.
Yeah, it's such I don't know, like it's a difficult kind of room. I think it feels a little bit more complicated because they also added Geno Stone, right? Like they also added Geno Stone this offseason. And I thought Jordan Battle played really, really well last year as a rookie. So I'm kind of leaning Geno Stone and Jordan Battle with Von Bell in sub packages. And like I said, like you said, expecting Dax Hill to play a lot more corner. I'm at least hopeful that it's Jordan Battle, but like I imagine since he saw the value in Battle last season because he was clearly like their best safety as a rookie too. And Von Bell, yeah, like last year in Carolina, obviously that wasn't great. Like just kind of fell flat as an IDP. I don't know. I think a lot of what I've kind of read, because I keep trying to figure out this situation and know exactly what they're going to do there. But a lot of what I've read recently, and it's still super early in the offseason, it talks a lot about what Bell brings to the locker room and from a leadership perspective and how he could be a mentor to Jordan Battle, things of that nature. So it feels a little bit to me like he might not be a full-time player. But again, like still really early in the offseason, and he has the experience there with Lou Anarumo. Like it does make sense that he would play. They also brought in Geno Stone and Jordan Battle being very good. Like that is the part that is throwing me the most with this group. So it's one that I'm mostly trying to avoid right now. But I mean, there's going to be somebody that emerges there. And I think Von Bell has probably just as good a shot as any.
It's interesting. The money speaks to the story that you're telling here, right? Geno Stone is 2 years, $14 million. He's obviously a starter. That's big money for safety. And you got Von Bell is making about $1.2 million. So it is obviously it suggests that he's a depth piece. So I guess I wasn't as high on Battle last year, and so. Of course, you got the PFF grades, so I can look them up, obviously, and failed to. But nevertheless, that's interesting. And so I look at last year's rotation, and it was a lot of. It was no consistency at all between the players that they had out there because they had Nick Scott. And so with 3 players at the safety rotation last year, keeping things jumbled, I guess you're probably right to exercise some more caution. Interesting.
Yeah. It's a weird group though, right? Like, cause even Jordan Battle, like as good as he was last year, like for whatever reason, Lou Anarumo just didn't give him a 100% role. Like for Nick Scott was terrible last year. He was one of the worst safeties in the league, and he was still kind of getting in there for like 20% of snaps, even near the end of the season to spell Jordan Battle a little bit for, I honestly have no idea. I can't explain it, but Battle was great, like 82.5 overall grade. So he was the 8th highest graded safety for us last season. But again, it wasn't a full season of work. It was 524 snaps on the year. So a smaller sample size, but I just thought he looked so much better than what they had, obviously Nick Scott, but maybe, Von Bell it's still definitely possible that he becomes a starter, or that at the very least it's maybe a split role too, which again just makes things muddy as well. So it's a weird group for me. Okay, last player on the list, another one that feels like it's been a long time since he was loved by IDP managers, but I think he'll be back close to that again in 2024. It's Jeremy Chinn, now of the Washington Commanders. So right away, I have to preface this by saying that Chinn may never reach the heights of his rookie season when he averaged an elite 15.9 fantasy points per game, one of the top scorers at his position. I don't think he's bouncing back to that level of production necessarily. Certainly possible for literally any safety, including Chinn, but that's not the realistic goal I'm setting for him this year. I think after last year's like really disappointing season, just getting him as a consistent starter for IDP again is enough of a starting point for him to kind of bounce back. So I feel like it's a really easy and obvious call to make, but I think it's an important one because that potential usage in Dan Quinn's defense is going to be the main thing. So starting with last year, what he's bouncing back from, I guess, he appeared in 12 games in 2023 for Carolina. Another, again, letting us down with the safety position again there, Carolina, failing to crack even an 80% weekly defensive snap share once, averaged a career low 39% of defensive snaps when he was active. That's a huge drop off from his 90% plus rate in each of the past seasons. But because of that, yeah, he just wasn't a factor for IDP, right? 4.9 points per game. But for Dan Quinn and the Washington Commanders, like, they need a player of this skill set. And they went out and got Chinn in free agency after Cameron Curl left for the Rams. And Dan Quinn's defense does project as one of the most single high defensive coverage schemes in the league, just based on, past history. But that absolutely, I think, should benefit Chinn, as I think he's the best fit for that safety role to rotate down toward the line of scrimmage in that box heavy deployment, soak up the tackles. So, it's one thing that he'll likely be starting again as a bounce back, but I think doing so in one of the most favorable alignments in the league for IDP safety alignments kind of makes him that much more enticing to me. So 2022 is kind of the range that I'd be expecting him to bounce back to. He was 14.1 points per game. Even that might be high. He was safety 10 in points per game that year. So there's definitely a world where I think he could be a top 10, top 12 safety again, but clear bounce back from last year at the very least for Jeremy Chinn. What do you think about him?
Yeah, 100% clear bounce back from last year. But it'd be hard to imagine that he could play as little as he did last year. It's just they talked him up in the preseason and talked about how you keep this guy off the field, and as well, you just don't call his number, I guess. So you play Von Bell and who's the other guy? Xavier Woods. They're sitting back there in two high shells, and they just didn't see Chinn as as an asset in a two-size set. And so he's playing this real situational big nickel role or big slot role that's kind of come in fashion with the teams that play a lot of too high. And so it just relegated him to the fantasy wasteland. As I took my lumps along with, I guess, probably I'm not the only one that took some lumps here to try to project that he would be that he might be a bounce back candidate last year. I don't know if I said that in this program or not, but I was on the Bird app saying it. So I guess I'm once bitten, twice shy out of this year. And the biggest concern is mouths to feed, which everybody hates to hear on offense. And defense, it's real, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. You've got Frankie Louvu, Bobby Wagner, Derek Forrest, Percy Butler, Quan Martin, who's being shifted from nickel to safety. Like they're just, how do these snaps and opportunities get passed around? So we look at Dan Quinn's safety utility last year, where the last 3 years he's had 3 safeties playing 80+% of snaps, or somewhere in a high number anyway. And so it's been a couple of years since he had a guy play full time as a safety, and that was Jaron Kearse wearing the dot about 3 years ago. So it stands to reason. I haven't looked too closely, but it stands to reason that Bobby Wagner wears the dot this year. And so if he does, then there's probably not a full-time safety. And so Chin, you're looking for, at his ceiling, an 80% type snap role, making big plays, playing in a role like Jaron Kearse did last year. And does that mean that Louvu comes off the field? I just can't figure out how to piece it. If I was a guy that did projections, and I should learn, I don't know how I would piece it together to make the number of fantasy assets that the names seem to suggest. I certainly agree that the ceiling is there, but boy, it seems like it's kind of a chimney up to the ceiling, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I like that. But yeah, it's definitely a concern with Dan Quinn and his past usage, right? Because even the linebacker position, like he wasn't deploying 2 full-time linebackers either, right? Because he liked to get those safeties out there. So I do still think that there's, a concern that maybe Frankie Louvu does come off the field or rotates down as a blitzer as well. And yeah, I guess I had been thinking about Quan Martin too much as a safety. I've been kind of projecting him as a nickel. So if he is moving back to safety, yeah, that definitely muddies things up a little bit more as well, right? But yeah, for me, if he is in that 80% range, like you do hope that it is kind of that Donovan Wilson, Jaron Kearse spending the majority of that time near the line of scrimmage, right? And being a player of like Chin, who that's where he kind of thrives and does his best work, like that is still going to lead to some IDP relevancy. But yeah, ideally we'd want to see him in a 100% snap role. So that'll definitely be an interesting situation to monitor, how much of Dan Quinn's tendencies from with the Dallas Cowboys, where it was a lot of linebacker rotation and safety rotation there, how much of that translates over to Washington. Because I don't think Bobby Wagner's coming off the field. I don't think you rotate him off. He's still one of the best linebackers in the league, but everybody else feels like they could be moved around a little bit more, right? So definitely something to kind of keep in mind there for Washington. All right, that is going to do it for our 2024 bounce back candidates. Thank you all so much for listening or watching on the YouTube. If you are on the tubes, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd greatly appreciate that. And I also really appreciate my guest, my friend, Mr. Dynasty Tripp, for coming on and dropping knowledge like he can. Tripp, can't thank you enough, my man.
Well, thanks for having me, bud. I really appreciate it. It's good talking with you again, and wish you the best of luck at Pro Football Focus for the season.
Thank you, sir. Yes, absolutely. It's always fun talking to you as well. And before you go, please do let everybody know where they could find more of you and your work as well.
I'm over at Football Guys, footballguys.com, writing articles that I call Reading the New Defense. So I've got 3 of them out so far, and I need to get to the Commanders, obviously, and see how that breaks down. But what I do is I review the defensive coordinators' tendencies and schemes and find out what I can about what they're talking about for the upcoming season, and try to project how the players fit into those patterns, and try to find some sleepers and identify some landmines before fantasy gamers stumble into them for drafts. So I'm going to try to get through 12 of them this year. That's the task that's been set ahead of me. I've got 3 down. I've got Seattle, Miami, and Tennessee down, looking at all the former Ravens assistant coaches to start with. And I'll be moving on to the Commanders in a few weeks here. So invite everybody to come over and check that out, and check out what we have happening at Football Guys.
Awesome. Yeah, some really valuable stuff there, and yeah, stuff that unique too to IDP that you won't necessarily find anywhere else. So definitely check out Tripp's work over at Football Guys. And then as for me, PFF.com houses everything I do, including new this week. IDP rankings and tiers are all up on the site for every position, and best of all, they're free. So please do go check those out now as well. Again, appreciate you all tuning in. No new IDP episode next week, as I'll be on holiday, but I will be back the week after that talking 2024 IDP breakout candidates with the great Jay Sabby. So be on the lookout for that. And until next time, peace out.